Hey yo, I'm Miss Linnea Lark and I'm back with a glazing tutorial. I'm going to go over every little bit of it, so don't you worry. Now, before we start filling out our glazing journal, I want you to remind yourself that the requirement of this project is that you must use 3 different glazes and they must be overlapping each other. All of them, all 3 must be overlapping each other in at least one area on your bowl. How you decide to arrange your different colors and how you decide to apply your different colors, whether it's brushing or sponging or splattering, is totally up to you. But you have to use a total of 3 glazes and they all have to be overlapping each other at least in one decent area. All right, very first, we're going to start with our glazing journal. I fill out the top with my name, my period, and the project, which is a slab bowl. I then draw out my slab bowl clearly and concisely. It doesn't have to be a masterpiece, but I need to be able to tell what in the world it is that I'm glazing with a visual. Then I go down to section 3. In section 3, you're asked to go to Pinterest. What I want you to do is I want you to find one glaze out of the glazing test tiles that you really love. Your most favorite glaze that you're most excited to give a try. And then what I want you to do is I want you to look up on Pinterest color palettes with that color. So for me, I called mine Celadon because it looks like a Celadon green. So I went ahead and Pinterested Celadon color palettes. And I was able to find a really nice one that I like a lot. It had a blue, a white, and that Celadon color. And then what I do is I go ahead and I look on my glazing test tiles. I try to find glazes that are similar colors. And now I have a color scheme that I know should look good together. So I'm going to be using patina, which is the green. I'm going to be using Dutch blue, which is the light blue. And then I'm going to be trying out Cascade white, which I've never tried before. I'm very excited. It's supposed to kind of make fusing a little bit more intense and a little bit more drippy. So we'll see what happens. Who knows? But what I'm going to do now is in section 3, after it asks you to go to Pinterest to find your color scheme, you're going to take a colored pencil that's similar in color. It doesn't have to be perfect. And you're going to go ahead in section 3 and color in your 3-color scheme. Now I give you 5 boxes, but I'm just going to go ahead and fill out the first 3. I'm going to leave white, white, and then write in the word white. And then I'm going to X out the 2 extra boxes. Now, it's also very important to know that for this project, you must pick a minimum of 3 glazes. And those glazes have to overlap each other and fuse into each other, at least in one area. However you decide to design your glazing is up to you. The whole bowl could be overlapping 3 different colors. You could do color 1 everywhere, color 2 everywhere, color 3 everywhere. And as long as you have 3 coats, it'll turn to glass and you're good to go. And then what will happen is you'll get a fusion of all 3 of those colors. But you could also get a little bit more creative. You could, as I'm doing on this bowl, I'm putting on splotches or organic shapes. You could do lines or patterns. You could do all kinds of things. You could sponge on some different glazes, but you need to make sure that there's at least a base of 3 solid coats of one glaze, and then you can play with the design on top. But you have to have 3 glazes touching each other at least in one area. Okay, so what that means is that all these colors are going to fuse together. Now, if you remember color theory, that means that if you pick colors that are across the color wheel from each other, that are complementary colors, let's say I take this green and I add a pink or a red to it, I'm going to end up with those 2 glazes fusing someplace, and those 2 colors are going to give me a brown or dirty color. Okay, so you need to be aware that you really don't want for this project, because we're fusing on this project, you probably, unless you're into brown muddy colors, you probably want to pick colors on the color wheel that are next to each other. Okay, so a green, a blue, and then you can also use white or black, which are neutrals or grays, and those will go with anything. So for my color scheme, I picked a blue, a green, and a white. So my color theory is on point. I head on down to part 4, and this is the last bit. And what we're going to do is we're going to start writing out a recipe of all of the glazes that we're going to use and how many coats and how we applied it. This is going to be very important. So I only want to start with my very first glaze because you might change your mind later. Okay, if you already wrote out a plan and you change it, just erase it and alter it. Make sure that your recipe is very accurate to what you're doing. So I'm going to go ahead and start by putting 3 coats of brushed on patina everywhere. And I do that because I want my bowl to mostly be green. And I also want to make sure that I have a minimum of 3 coats everywhere so that my bowl actually becomes glass and it is waterproof and watertight and it's ready to go to be used with empty bowls. As soon as I'm done writing out that I'm putting 3 brushed coats of patina on my pot next, I'm going to go ahead and color in the color key with that same green color that represents patina. And then I'm also going to color in my bowl where I'm going to apply those 3 coats. And I'm going to apply those 3 coats everywhere. So I go ahead and draw or color in green on all sides of that bowl. And then before I go on to my next glaze, I'm actually going to go and glaze this now. So we'll be coming back to the glazing journal for our second and again for our third glazes. But for now, we're going to put the journal away and we're going to go ahead and start glazing. Before I start applying glazes onto my bowl, last class we all washed off our bowls, so they should be ready to go. But there's so much dust in my classroom that I go ahead and use the computer blower to take my bowl outside and de-dust everything. Also be very careful that your hands aren't oily. So you want to wash your hands before handling your bowl because if you've touched your face or you have maybe a lotion on or some kind of cream, it'll seep into your bowl and it'll actually repel the glazes. So make sure that your hands are really clean and then dust your bowl off outside where we're not going to all be breathing in your dust. All right, kiddos, let's talk about tools. This is what you're going to need. You're going to need a banding wheel. Make sure that it's clean. And please make sure that you clean it when you're done so that we're not always cleaning these banding wheels for other people. Get your piece out. You can put that on your banding wheel. You're going to get your glaze. Whatever your first glaze is, that's all you're going to get out is the very first glaze you're going to apply. I also like to get out a bowl full of water and a sponge. I also get a paintbrush, a nice thick one. And I also get a bowl for my glaze. Now, you guys, we only have 1 tub of each glaze in the classroom, and all 30 of you might want to use the exact same glaze. So if somebody has already gotten the glaze that you want to use out, you have to go and look and scavenge around the classroom and try to find that glaze and then pour a little bit into a small, clean bowl. Okay? It's very, very important. You can take a little bit more than you think you need, but it's important that that bowl is clean because when you're done, you're going to pour that glaze back into the tub and we do not want it contaminated. Okay, so I go ahead and start by pouring some of my patina glaze into a clean bowl. I use a big brush, but I actually don't like those really big brushes, so I downgraded to a smaller brush. And I apply 1 coat everywhere. And whenever I'm applying glazes, I like to have a sequence that I do. So I started with the floor, I went to a wall, and then I worked my way around until I got back to the first wall again. I then did the ledges, and then I did the outsides. Having a rememberable pattern to how you glaze will help you because these really do dry quickly and you need to keep track of how many layers you're doing. In fact, I recommend that you, after every layer you do, you mark a little tally in the notes section of your glazing journal. That way, if the bell's about to ring, you can actually remember next class, oh man, I only did one coat. I need to do two more. Or, oh man, I got to two, but I still need one more. That way you can keep track of how many coats you've done. And now I have to let my pot dry. Notice that I'm using the blow dryer for this just to speed things up for the video, but I only have a few blow dryers and not everybody's going to be able to blow dry, okay? So you need to be patient and wait for each layer to completely dry. If you do not wait for your layer to dry and you go ahead and put on a second layer, all of the areas where your glaze is still wet are going to be very thin and it's not going to turn to glass. That's how you get inconsistent application. So please make sure that each layer is dry before you go on to the next. Once it's dry, I go on to my second coat. I go ahead and put a second coat of patina everywhere. I start with the bottom, I go to the walls, and then I go to the rim, and then I do the outside, and then I'm done with the second coat. But this coat is gonna take twice as long to dry. Your clay is getting more and more wet in its core, and so you're gonna have to keep being more and more patient as you get more and more layers. Once my second coat is dry, I go on to my third coat and I go in the same order. I start with the bottom, I go to each wall, I make sure I have the rims, and then I go to the outside. Did you notice that I have not been doing the bottom of my bowl? Just ignore the bottom of your bowl because we want the glazes to be able to be completely dry before we flip them over and risk the rims. Once I get my bowl dry enough to move, I wash off my banding wheel, put a piece of foam down, make sure that that foam is clean before I put my bowl on it, and then I go about putting 3 coats on the bottom of my piece. Okay, I have to wait for each layer to totally dry before I put on the next one. So be very patient, kiddos. Now listen, it is 10 times harder to glaze a piece that is already glazed. All right. So I am not going to fire your pieces if I think you've been applying these layers without letting each layer totally dry. If you don't let each layer totally dry and you go on to the next layer, then your glaze is not going to be thick enough. And then your glaze is not going to turn to glass. And then your bowl that is made for liquids is not going to be waterproof. So please be patient. And now I'm done with my 3 coats of patina. I dump all the excess glaze back into the tub. I do not want to waste it. I make sure that I note in my note section of my glazing journal that I have done 3 coats and I'm moving on to my second glaze, which is Dutch blue. I go ahead and fill in the color key with the blue color and I draw out the areas on my pot where I'm going to be putting in the Dutch blue. And I decided to do some organic shapes that are kind of random. I was kind of bummed it started looking a little bit more like cow print than cute shapes, but whatever, we'll see what happens. And then I go on to my actual pot. And I took the time to go ahead and draw these out because I wanted to make sure that they were evenly spaced and that I still had a lot of green space around these shapes because I'm really excited about that patina. I carefully paint all of my organic shapes, one nice thick coat of Dutch blue. I get my glazing journal back out and I add the white cascade. I'm going to put 1 layer in the middle of each of these shapes. Now the white is not that easy to see when I use it on the coloring pencils, but I just do my best and label it where I can. And then I go ahead and paint all of the little inside circles white. I'm hoping that these kind of drip a little bit. And so I don't want to use too much because I already had 3 layers of patina down, and I don't want to make these run off the side of my pot. If you apply way too much glaze to your pot, you run the risk of sealing it to the kiln shelf if it drips down your legs. So even though I'm doing more than 3 coats in places, I'm very careful not to go more than 6. So just make sure that you're not putting on your glazes way too heavy and thick. I let that dry, and while it's drying, I go ahead and put my last step. I'm going to put one more layer of Dutch blue on all of my shapes. That way the white cascade is sandwiched between 2 layers. I kind of want to see what that looks like when they fuse together. So I go ahead and put one more layer of Dutch blue on top. Up last is you gotta wipe your bottom. This is the last step, but it is a crucial step because I will not load your piece into the kiln unless your feet, the very bottom of your feet, are totally sponged off. You need to make sure that the sides of your feet have glaze on them, but none of that glaze, that thick glaze, is touching the flat foot. Okay? If you do get glaze on the bottom, I will reject you, and then it's not going to get fired. Your grade's not going to get put in time. So do not forget to wipe your bottom.